Hello and a very warm welcome to you. It is being derided as poverty porn. But is it wrong for celebrities to focus attention on countries and people that need helping? And if they don't, who will? Watching Roundtable with me, David Foster. The annual UK charity appeal Comic Relief hits our TV screens this week, and with it, the familiar sight of celebrities visiting people being helped by handouts. But those celebrities are being accused now of perpetuating tired stereotypes about places such as Africa. So do they deserve the white saviour label they're being given for trying to support good causes?
Celebrity power has long been used by aid groups to draw attention to charitable causes around the world. But is the practice outdated and out of touch? This photo of journalist Stacey Dooley prompted British MP David Lammy to accuse her of perpetuating tired and unhelpful stereotypes and an old idea from the colonial era, adding that the world does not need any more white saviours. According to the World Bank, an estimated 413 million people in Africa currently live in extreme poverty. And global inequality is rising. Oxfam says the number of billionaires has doubled over the past 10 years, while almost half of the world's population live on little more than $5 a day. But do Western public personas perpetuate the colonial past, or are they an effective means of raising funds for those most in need?
So let's get the conversation going. Joining me at the round table today, we have Francis Longley, Chief Exec of Amref Health Africa UK. Judith Escribano's here, Head of Communications at Islamic Relief UK. Lloyd Masipa, Director of Africa Public Policy Research Institute, and we have also the Deputy Editor of the Daily Express, Michael Booker. Jolly good to have you all here. Lloyd, let me start with you. £1 billion raised, Comic Relief that is, over 30 years. What's the harm in somebody going out and helping to raise more money?
Well, there's no harm in people, a person helping another person. But let's look at this from a holistic point of view. Africa is a continent, 54 countries, coming out of still carrying the colonialism load. And then we have a situation where that same stereotype of white person going back to Africa and actually determining what and how.
I've heard what David Lammy has said. What I'm going to say to you is £1 billion raised over 30 years. It goes to help people. You've just said the same thing.
Exactly.
There's no harm in helping people. If this helps to raise money, what's the harm in it?
The harm is in how that help is delivered. If it's being delivered with the sincerity with the African person involved and determining where it goes, where the actual help is required, then it will be different. In this case, we have help and donor funds being specific to particular goals. I mean, look, I come from Zimbabwe. There are about over 1,000 NGOs operating in Zimbabwe. But you find some of them mean very well, and they're doing extremely well. Some come in and actually push a political narrative where they actually determine...
But was it not unkind of him to say this about somebody who's simply trying to help other people?
I don't think I understood him as something as unkind. What he simply meant was, what doesn't the platform be used to promote the African celebrity, who will probably be more in touch with what's happening in Africa than a person coming in, with no clue what's going on.
I grew up in the northeast of England in the early 1980s, and when Comic Relief started in 1988, I remember I was at a comprehensive school. There was not a great ethnic mix in the 1980s in the northeast of England. There was only a few black people. And so it wasn't something that had really come across our plate particularly, apart from the famine in Ethiopia. Now, when Comic Relief started...
Geldorf highlighting that in 1985.
In 85.
Live Aid.
And then in 88, Comic Relief started up. And we, as a school, we had a Comic Relief Day on that day in 1988. The first year, they raised, I think, 15 million. But we weren't thinking, oh, isn't it terrible that these kids, these black kids, we weren't thinking about what colour they were, which is what David Lammy's brought into it, calling us white, or the white saviour aspect of it. But we just wanted to help.
Can I ask you this, Michael? would you have been interested as a teenager? I don't know what age you were then, but a young person. Would you have been interested as a young person if it hadn't been amusing, comic relief, and if it hadn't had great characters such as Lenny Henry, who happens to be black, a black British comedian, in it?
Well,
Lenny
Henry was huge
all
at
these
that
people
time
are doing
as well.
is trying to draw attention to a worthwhile cause.
Well, these days it may be corny, it may be old hat, but back then it was fairly fresh and new, and we saw what we saw, and we were entertained by it. We then went out and did entertaining things to raise the money, and we thought we were doing good. Now, David Lammy, I think he's put us back 20 years by saying.
No, he has not. He has
Judith,
not.
one second, Lloyd.
It's important to remember with these kind of TV appeals that they're targeting a particular audience. So they're not targeting active enthusiasts, people who are going on marches or writing to their MPs or signing petitions. They're targeting Joe Public or Mohammed or Fatima or what have you, who generally is not that interested in international development, but is keen to do good and is keen to support charity.
Yeah.
And so what you have to do is you have to appeal to them with people that they know. So Lenny Henry or Stacey Dooley are well known here in the UK, so that works for a UK audience. If you were to use, say, a comedian from Mali or what have you, a lot of comedians use cultural references and political references to express their humour. That wouldn't connect with a UK audience.
So what you're saying that the fundraising is insincere then, because if you're presenting a white person to raise money from the local UK audience, but the picture is giving to Africa is that Africa is this basket case that's constantly going to need aid.
No, it's not.
No, I haven't said it's
The point
insincere.
is, what he's
I haven't
saying,
said it's
what the
insincere.
picture is saying is this person
Yes.
needs help, not a continent needs help necessarily.
That's my
Yeah,
point.
no,
exactly.
please, Francis, let Francis come in because you haven't said a word yet.
Thank you. I think the important thing is the lack of balance, because if the only images that come out are these people need help, look at these poor, starving, helpless people, you need to come in
You
and do
wouldn't be
something.
raising money if they didn't need help.
There are people who need help, and there are ways of telling those stories. But if the only story you tell is of victims and helplessness,
But if
people are given a distorted
Rwanda
impression.
in some of the conversations I think you had with our producers, and you talked about a gleaming new conference centre there. If they showed pictures of the wealth of one nation, then people would not be inclined to give, would they?
It's not only about saying, do you show pictures of the wealth? If you think about what we see of Africa on television in the UK, we see starving children, and we see David Attenborough in a safari programme. That's it. Now, that doesn't represent an entire continent. It doesn't give a balanced view.
Thank you.
And it's very damaging to our perception, particularly of
But is
African
it
diaspora
damaging
people in
to
this
this-
country
to this-
and of the way that we deliver aid and the way that we
Is
think
it
about the
damaging to
continent.
this family who needed help? I mean, the guy's great uncle says, I don't know why people are criticising her. What's the harm? You know, we've got some good out of this, he said.
I think what's interesting about what David Lammy said was that he was complaining about the image. He hasn't seen the film, neither have I, none of us probably
haven't
have.
seen the film either.
He was complaining about that one image and the stereotype of it.
Okay,
and he
so
was
it's
very
a white
clear.
TV celebrity holding a black African baby. And it's this black African baby's great uncle that I was referencing there. If you haven't seen it,
Look,
it's only what you're being told.
let me-
And
let me-
what you're
let
being-
me-
I think
let
we've
me-
all seen the image from
Yeah.
Instagram,
Yes.
and
Yes.
I think we can probably all agree it was probably an unfortunate image to put on Instagram. I'm not
But
of
tell
that.
me
I'm
why.
not of.
Tell me why,
well,
because I
listen.
don't get it.
Okay,
She's out there
let me
trying to
tell
raise
you-
money.
Let me tell you why
people who
then,
need help.
Lloyd,
Yeah,
if
yeah,
I could.
hang on a second.
Let me tell you why I think it's unfortunate. I'm not of the selfie generation. I think it's a bit crass to take photos of people when I go to the communities in which we work and I talk to them. Sometimes they want to have a photo taken with me. Fine, I'll have a photo taken, but I'm not going to put it on social media. I will look at it later with my children and I will talk about the visit, but I'm not going to say, hey, look at me, look what I did. So I think it's unfortunate that that image went out. However, I agree with Francis. Look, we haven't seen the documentary yet. Comic Relief is changing the way that it's done things. So it came under a lot of criticism last year or the year before when they used the singer Ed Sheeran for a visit. And it was clear he didn't really have a very clear understanding of how development works. It's different with Stacey Dooley. She is a documentary maker of 10 years standing. She's an award-winning documentary maker. She created a documentary that is the most viewed documentary on BBC iPlayer. She won an award for it. She's different. So Comic
not
Relief
daft.
was
She's
trying
from
to
a-
do it
she's from a
different.
Michael, sorry, Michael hasn't said
and,
anything for a little while.
and the
please.
film that we might see this Friday might well be different from the kind of content that has been
She's
produced
from a
in
fairly
the past.
poor working class background
Yes.
of her own. And some of the projects that are shown in Comic Relief also show videos with celebrities going into poor areas of Britain as well. And I didn't see David Lammy questioning that. He also made it a racial question as well, didn't he?
This is.
I haven't seen-
Let me ask a question. I'll put it to both of you.
All right.
Would David Lammy have made such a fuss if it had been Lenny Henry, black British personality, holding a black African baby? Is it because Stacey Dooley was white? No, let Michael finish.
Well, that's what it appears to be. That's what.
that's racism, isn't it?
Well, I wouldn't say
disagree.
it's racist. I'm just saying that he's raised that as a question there. And like as he said, I don't think he would have done it to Lenny Henry. I don't think there's been some black Hollywood actors who've gone out and done the
Idris
same
Elba.
thing. Idris Elba.
Yep.
He didn't. He waited for the time when he could claim the moral high ground. And David Lammy likes to do that. David Lammy is one of those politicians that lives on Twitter and likes to stir up his followers and likes to get the likes, likes to get the retweets. And sometimes I think he doesn't do things for the right reason. And I think in this,
I wanna get Lloyd in on this point, yeah.
Can I disagree on that? Because if you look at the story, what he says, I think Comic Relief actually invited him, if he could be part of the documentary, and he said, look, I can't come there because I'm black. David Lammy is British. He's a black British, so he cannot represent Africa because he's lived in England all his life. What he is saying is that get the African people, the African perspective involved.
But do you not
That is
understand you
not-
would not then get the viewers? As Michael said, if it hadn't been funny, if it hadn't involved people that he knew, it wouldn't have raised money here in the UK. You get anonymous black African people, then how are you going to raise money
You
for a
have
good
Africans
cause?
that have settled here that are now celebrities. Mufaro is one of them. He's a Somali African that is, settled here. Those kind of people, at least they will understand the African narrative.
There is a way of combining, as Judith's rightly saying, people we're familiar with, who we would be interested in watching on the television, but when they get there, they can talk to local people. They could, meet a television presenter from that country or a comedian or an actor or whoever it is who can then say, let me show you around where I'm from, let me talk to you about it, and could do that in an engaging way. And you would then be hearing an authentic local voice telling their own story
think we
and
see
talking
that,
about their
though.
own circumstances.
People aren't stupid.
not as-
Viewers
it's not
see
as
the stories
specific as
of the
that.
children, they see the stories of the families, they see the projects that have been supported. They don't just think, oh, Stacey Dooley's brilliant,
is a
or Lenny Henry's
short-sighted
brilliant.
view of it.
But I think people just, TV company and the charity want as much money as they possibly can. Stacey Dooley these days, as TV ratings are going down, Stacey Dooley is huge on Instagram, 700,000 followers. They're having to move into those areas to get more eyes on and more donations. It's as simple as that.
In these days of social media, the guy sitting in an African country looks at that picture and then thinks, so do these people think we're a basket case? Is
don't
this,
think people
is this
do.
what they think of us? Remember, we're talking about a
If you're
person.
somebody who hasn't got very much to eat, who hasn't got clean water, who needs medical care when it comes to pregnancies, which is one of the things
That is
you're
not-
involved in,
that is
are
not
you
the-
really going to
That
think
is
that?
not the majority of the African. The African
No,
sits
no, no,
there.
but this is where the money's going. That's my point.
There
The
are
people who
people-
need this money, for whom it has to
there
be
are
raised,
people with
are
nothing-
they going to think what you
There are
just said?
people with nothing to eat in the United Kingdom, in America, the so-called first world countries. There are people sleeping under the bridges here in the UK.
I think when you tell a partial story, I think when you represent people's circumstances in ways which are not entirely the full picture. I think when you're saying, this child, we see this picture of Stacey Dooley clutching this sad little boy, and we think, gosh, poor little lad, I wonder what's going on there. He lives with his grandmother. He has difficult circumstances, but, nonetheless, he has a family, he has a community, he has a story. And all we see at the moment, having not seen the film, is Stacey Dooley effectively saying, look at me with this cute baby.
But I will say again,
It's kind of unpleasant.
having not seen the film, you don't know what story is told. I've been a journalist for more than 40 years. I don't think I've ever been able to tell the complete picture. It's impossible to do so. You do the best that you can. And are you suggesting that these people are doing it for the wrong reasons or for the right reasons?
No, I think it's important, again, to think what is it that you're trying to achieve. So if you're trying to raise funds, you you will tell a story in a particular way. If you are feeding back to your supporters about how their funds have been raised, you will tell a much more positive story because you want to retain your donors. You want your donors to know that the money that they've given you in the past has been spent well.
Yeah.
And so you have to adapt your message according to your audience. Something that Islamic Relief UK has done recently, we worked with a British Muslim graffiti artist, Muhammad Ali, and we took him out to Lebanon to see a psychotherapy project. And what he did is he delivered an art workshop. So he's a street artist. He delivered an art workshop. He talked to the people that we're helping. He went to the Becker Valley refugee camp to talk to people. And we've produced some film now, which is, okay, it starts with him presenting it because that's the draw for some sections of the British Muslim community, is to see how somebody from their community is viewing the world. So it starts with his story. He paints this beautiful mural on the wall.
Yeah.
And then yesterday what he did down at the Greenwich Islamic Centre on the mosque wall was paint a representation of what he had seen.
So why was that right when you said, and you, in notes to my producer, you said, and you mentioned this graffiti artist, then you go on to say, we don't take out volunteers to take part in deployments at Islamic Relief, but I know other organisations that do.
That's not a volunteer. So this is what I'm saying is this is using a celebrity in a different
So he
way.
volunteered?
This is using a celebrity in a different way
Yeah.
to perhaps the old way that celebrities have been used in the past, where it's been them fronting a story. And we know that hasn't worked. And as we keep saying, none of us know what the film.
You're using somebody well-known to help sell your product to try and raise money.
I think that's okay.
Same thing, isn't it?
I think that's okay.
Isn't that
I
the same
think
as
if
what
it
we're talking
appeals
about
to the audience, yeah, I think that's okay. I think if it appeals to the audience to which you are trying to tell your story, then you can do that.
Is that okay? Quick
No. Quick one.
Is that okay?
No, it's not okay. The picture says 1,000 words. That's a general term. So when you present that from the African perspective, we're talking about countries coming out of colonialism. So everybody is thinking about, in the world of globalization, neoliberalism, the world is coming together. So we also want to be seen as equals in Africa, not charity cases. So the help must come in on an equal footing with respect, not I'll give you the money, what I think about you is neither here nor there. A picture speaks 1,000 words.
I find quite offensive about the way that Lamy presented it as well is the idea, or it's the inference, that everyone's sitting at home is just this bovine mass throwing food in the face, watching Comic Relief, and they all presume that everywhere in Africa is dirt poor and poverty-stricken. I don't think people are like that. People are more educated than that.
That's exactly my point.
But they know that in certain areas they do need help, and they think that by focusing on these areas where celebrities go in, let's not forget, Comic Relief is a TV charity. It's very visual-based. You have to hook viewers in. Otherwise, donations go down. It's a simple economic thing.
And the funny thing is, the world as a global village, the same guys sitting in Africa see the poor here in England, see the poor sleeping rough in England.
Yeah.
So they also point and say, look, you're giving us help.
But they're shown on Comic Relief as well.
My point exactly. So
that doesn't...
So it is important that people treat each other as equals. Yes.
Yeah, can I just ask you something? Again, the notes which I referred to when I was just talking here to Judith, you say that you are upset that 70% of the funds that are raised anyway go for bureaucratic purposes.
That's another thing.
Yeah, no, please. I want to say, because I spoke to Francis before the programme about this, and I said, you get money from Comic Relief.
We do.
And how much of your money that you receive is actually spent on what you think it should do? You said?
Well, slightly different.
More than 90%.
More than 90%, but in fact, Comic Relief...
70% wasted, 90% spent properly.
I disagree.
Well, from a Comic Relief grant, 100% of it's spent properly, because similarly to UK government money, then we would apply to Comic Relief for a grant and be very detailed about what we want to spend the money on, put in a very detailed itemised budget, and then have to report back on a regular basis. We were going to spend this much on training or this much on transport or whatever it was, and we would have to report back on that at regular points, and the next tranche of money is only released to us if we're up to date with the project activity and the money is being spent in the way that we've said it will. So at that point, 100% of that Comic Relief grant is going where we said it will.
What I'm getting from Lloyd here is that he thinks it's wrong that people should be giving money to poor people in Africa because it's demeaning. And you're suggesting that 70% of it's wasted, whereas in fact it's less than,
We
it's
have-
100%.
we have
It's 100%
We
here.
have over
You just
1,000
object to it in principle.
We have over 1,000 charities operating in a country like Zimbabwe,
Yeah.
a country of 16 million. 70% of that money is spent on land cruisers and big houses by the very same people that are running these charities. It is documented. The poor...
And are they all white saviours, or are they white, black saviours? It doesn't really matter what colour they are.
I don't think the colour is the issue here.
Well, it's one of the reasons we're talking about it.
No. The principle here is that how are you helping? You're raising £1 billion here. But is the £1 billion getting to where it's supposed to go? It is not. In particular, in Zimbabwe, it is not. 70% is spent on admin purposes, running around in land cruisers, and the people they're meant to help are not better off.
Where's that number coming from, I wonder? Because
It's-
that doesn't
it's-
sound
it's-
familiar
it's
to
well-
me.
it's well
Yeah,
documented.
we
I'll-
produce
I'll-
annual reports. We have auditors
No,
checking.
let Judith speak, because she hasn't said anything for a while.
We have an annual report. You can see how our money is spent. We have auditors coming in to make sure that the money reaches.
have
We
an
have
annual
program
report on,
staff who
NGOs in
check.
Zimbabwe?
Oh, well, yes, of course. We have
Yeah?
to monitor. And we have local, not in Zimbabwe. We don't work in Zimbabwe, but in other African countries. We work in Mali, Malawi, Niger, Ethiopia, Kenya. Quite clear guidelines to demonstrate how the money is spent. And if we had any inkling, any thought at all that 70% of it was being wasted, we would not be funding that organisation.
Well,
we have very strict procedures in place
in
to
our
make
case,
sure
it's
that
well
money reaches its
documented.
final destination.
We're a policy institute. We've got this documentation that says 70% where the money coming in is used, one, for their own comfort, two, to change the political narrative in the country. So the actual poor people that are meant to benefit from this charity.
But okay,
not
You want to
happening.
get rid of charity altogether?
Yeah, I'm suggesting, perhaps, Lloyd, that this is a conscience thing. That people who talk in the way that you're talking feel guilty about the fact that they're not able to help their own people on their own
I don't
continent,
think so.
and are pointing the finger at those people, these white saviours, who they think
don't
are
think so.
showing them up.
No, I think African problems should be spearheaded by the African people. That's what I'm saying. Where the money is coming from is neither here
We
nor
didn't
there.
mean to put you front and centre of all the criticism here. Look, we like you having it on the programme. But there are more important things to worry about than this, aren't there? What David Lammy said is just sort of, it should be battered away.
Well, it should be battered away, but he's very influential. As I said before, he's got a lot of followers on social media, and they've all fed off this as well, and he's fed off it, and it gives him an element of fame as well. You know, look, as I said before, it is you know, pretty old hat what they do, but there's no better ways of doing it.
But there is no subtlety. There is no subtlety in social media. I think we all know that.
Exactly.
When he put that message out, we contacted David Lammy as well, Islamic Relief, and we made a joke and we said we also caution against brown saviours because we created a video last year for Ramadan which had a well-meaning British Muslim from the Pakistani community called Yusuf. This was a made-up story, who wanted to go out and do good, and he flew out to Africa. And when he got there, he took his box of aid, and it was inappropriate aid. He didn't know. He wanted to know where the poor people were. He didn't know how to deliver aid. And what our clear message was: don't go and do stuff like that. Leave it to the experts. And I think that is the way that many development agencies work. So I'm sure
And we've done a
Amran
programme
is
about that here at the round table. I
local
totally understand that.
organisations.
This is a different matter, I'm suggesting. It's somebody using a platform to criticise people that he would always criticise no matter what they were doing.
I don't think criticizing David Lammy as a person is fair, because it's a principle that he was pointing out, that you are busy going there presenting a scenario that is reinforcing a certain stereotype. In a continent of 54 countries, some of those countries are doing extremely well, and they're actually providing aid to other African countries.
But we know that. A lot of people do know that.
No, but that picture doesn't say that.
Well, that
Will you
picture can't say
benefit-
everything,
that
can it?
Will you
picture
benefit
says
this year from
Africa
Comic Relief, do you think?
is a
I don't know.
place.
I mean, we'll have to apply for a grant. I certainly hope
Do
so.
you hope so?
I hope so, absolutely. We love working with Comic Relief. I think that they would acknowledge, I think they have publicly acknowledged, that a gap had emerged between the work that they support, the grants that they give, the teams that were looking after the programmes, and then the way they were presenting that on television and in the appeals.
if
they're
David
trying
Lammy-
to bring those two things much more closely together. I think they've acknowledged the problem they found themselves in.
If David Lammy's comments mean that one person decides not to give, then they're unhelpful, aren't they?
David Lammy, I think, said a very interesting thing, which was that he was very clear. He was criticising that photograph. He's entitled to his opinion about that. And he also was saying, yes, people should support. People, you know, he doesn't want to stop anyone giving money. He's just saying he has a problem with that photograph, the stereotype that it reinforces, and the unfortunate negative ideas which it's planting in people's minds and it's continuing to reinforce, which are very well-established tropes about Africa and African people.
Yes.
In that village where that kid and that picture was taken, there is a health team that's paid for by Comic Relief donations, which is, I think it was anti-malaria vaccinations, things like that. That's saving lives as we speak. Mm-hmm. And that's the point of this, isn't it, surely?
There's no problem with that. What we're saying here is that that picture on its own says 1,000 words. Right? Anybody can interpret it differently.
What does it say? You've only got 20 words to tell me what those 1,000 words are.
What it says is,
what
it says that colonialism has come and gone, and is coming back in one form or another through this aid. Political narratives are being controlled through aid. So for the African person, this is, you know, this is actually going back. It's a neo-colonial approach. So let's have Africans speaking for Africans. If you're bringing in that money, involve the African person in it. That way they'll be able to tell you.
That was almost 1,000 words, Lloyd. We'll forgive you. Thank you very much for coming on. You were the butt of an awful lot of criticism on this programme. We do appreciate you coming on. Thanks a lot. And thank you to you too. Read into it whatever you will. Comic Relief is on at the end of this week in the UK. It does raise an awful lot of money. Whether you think it's sorting it out in its own way or not, that's another matter. But it's also extremely funny. From me, David Foster, from all of us here at the table, thank you for watching. Thank you for coming in. We hope to have your company next time. Bye-bye.